Imagine living 28 years believing that World War II was still happening. Imagine surviving only on roots and rainwater, sleeping in a cave you dug with your own hands. Now imagine discovering that you weren't alone in that cave, and that your companions had been dead for decades. This is the story of Shoichi Yokoi, the Japanese soldier who became a worldwide legend when he was found in 1972 in the jungles of Guam. But the version you know, of the loyal soldier who didn't know the war had ended, is just the surface of something much more disturbing. Because in Yokoi's secret diaries, which were never published in full, there's a truth that authorities preferred to hide. Hikonyuki. The war had ended since 1950. The problem is that something in the jungle didn't want him to leave, and when you discover what that something was, your view of the unsolved mysteries of World War II will never be the same. Prepare yourself for a journey through 28 years of isolation, where the line between reality and nightmare dissolves completely. This is the true story of Guam's last guardian. Shoichi Yokoi was born on March 31, 1915, in the city of Saori, in Aichi Prefecture, Japan. Son of a lower middle-class family, Yokoi grew up at a time when Japan was undergoing a radical transformation from a feudal society to a modern industrial power. His father was a carpenter. His mother took care of the house and 4 children. Shoichi was the youngest. From childhood, Yokoi demonstrated exceptional ability for detailed manual work. At 14, he was sent to work as an apprentice in a tailor shop in Nagoya. There he learned not only to sew, but to understand fabrics, fibers, material resistance, knowledge that decades later would become the difference between life and death in the Guam jungle. Yokoi was known for his meticulous and disciplined personality. His co-workers described him as someone who never left a job half-finished, who checked each seam 3 times before considering a piece complete. This obsession with perfection was seen as a virtue in Japanese culture of the time, where personal honor was directly linked to the quality of work performed. In 1937, at age 22, Yokoi opened his own tailor shop. He was a single man, dedicated to work, who dreamed of marrying and having a traditional Japanese family. He had even begun courting a young woman named Mihoko, daughter of a local merchant. Marriage plans were being discussed when Yokoi's world was turned upside down. In December 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan officially entered World War II. The Japanese war machine needed soldiers, and Yokoi, at 26, was at the perfect age for military service. In January 1942, he received the conscription notice that would change his life forever. Military training was brutal. Yokoi was sent to a training camp in Kyushu, where he spent 6 months learning combat tactics, weapons handling, and most importantly, the philosophy of Bushido, the samurai code of honor that had been adapted for the modern Japanese army. The doctrine was clear and absolute: death before dishonor, never surrender to the enemy. A Japanese soldier prefers to die rather than live with the shame of surrender. These words were repeated every day during training, engraved in each soldier's mind until they became more than orders. They were fundamental truths about what it meant to be Japanese. Yokoi absorbed these teachings with the same meticulous dedication he applied to tailoring. For him, following orders wasn't just a military matter, it was a matter of personal identity. In July 1944, after 2 years of training and service at bases in Japan, Yokoi was assigned to the 38th Infantry Division and sent to Guam in the Mariana Islands. The island had been captured by the Japanese in December 1941 and transformed into a strategic military base in the Pacific. Guam in 1944 was a tropical paradise transformed into a military fortress. The island, with its 540 square kilometers, was covered by dense mountainous jungle in the interior, with white sand beaches around the perimeter. The Japanese had built a complex network of bunkers, tunnels, and defensive positions, preparing for what they knew would be an inevitable American attack. Yokoi was assigned to a coastal defense unit in the southern region of the island. His function was to operate a heavy machine gun in a bunker overlooking Inarajan Beach. During the first weeks, life in Guam seemed almost normal. Routine exercises, regular patrols, letters home. But Yokoi noticed something strange from the first day. Veteran soldiers who had been on the island longer spoke in whispers about certain areas of the jungle that were forbidden, not by official orders, but by a kind of tacit agreement among the men. Don't go to the valley north of Mount Lamlam after sunset. warned a veteran sergeant named Tanaka. There are things there that don't belong to this war. Yokoi initially dismissed this as superstition from stressed soldiers, but as days passed, he began to notice that even officers avoided sending patrols to certain areas of the island. There were military maps where certain regions were marked only as restricted area, without additional explanation. In mid-July 1944, signs that something big was about to happen became undeniable. American reconnaissance planes flew over the island daily. Warships were spotted on the horizon. The tension among Japanese soldiers was palpable. Yokoi spent his last days of normalcy writing letters to his family and to Mihoko. In one of these letters, dated July 18, 1944, he wrote, "Dear Mihoko, the situation here is becoming serious. I can feel that great changes are coming. If something happens to me, I want you to know that my last thoughts will be about our future together. I promise I will return home no matter what happens. A Japanese soldier always keeps his promises." This letter was never sent. Yokoi kept it in his uniform pocket, and it would remain with him for the next 28 years. On the night of July 20, 1944, Yokoi was on guard duty in his bunker when he saw something that deeply disturbed him. Strange lights moved in the jungle, not flashlights or military signals, but a bluish luminosity that seemed to pulse like a heart. The lights moved in patterns that made no sense, rising and falling through the trees as if unaffected by gravity. He reported the incident to his superior, Lieutenant Yamamoto, who simply said, "Forget what you saw, soldier. Focus on the enemy coming from the sea." But Yokoi couldn't forget. That night he had the first of many disturbing dreams that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Dreams where voices whispered in ancient Japanese, speaking about guardians and eternal vigil. On July 21, 1944, at 8:30 in the morning, the American invasion of Guam began with a naval bombardment that lasted 3 hours. Yokoi had never experienced anything like it. The sound was deafening, the earth shook constantly, and the air became thick with dust and smoke. From his bunker, he could see American warships lined up on the horizon like a wall of steel. Artillery shells fell like rain, systematically destroying Japanese defenses. Within hours, the island's communication network was completely destroyed. At 11:45, Yokoi saw the first American landing craft approaching the beach. He opened fire with his machine gun, but knew it was useless. There were hundreds of vessels, thousands of soldiers. American numerical superiority was overwhelming. During the afternoon, Yokoi's position was directly attacked by Sherman tanks. He watched his bunker companions die one by one. Sato was hit by grenade shrapnel. Kimura was killed by a sniper shot. Nakamura simply disappeared when a tank shell directly hit his position. At 6 p.m., with ammunition almost exhausted and surrounded by American forces, Yokoi made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He abandoned the bunker and fled to the jungle. The Guam jungle at night was a labyrinth of terrifying sounds. Yokoi could hear battles happening in all directions, shots, explosions, screams in English and Japanese. He moved slowly, trying to avoid both American patrols and panicked Japanese soldiers who might shoot at any shadow. During his escape, he encountered 2 other Japanese soldiers who had had the same idea. Corporal Bunzo Minagawa, 26, a communications specialist, and Private Masashi Ito, 24, an elite marksman. Both were wounded. Minagawa had shrapnel in his left arm. Ito had taken a grazing bullet wound to his leg. "Where are we going?" asked Ito, limping as he leaned against a tree. "To the interior," replied Yokoi. "We'll hide until Japanese forces counterattack." They didn't know that this counterattack would never come. The 3 soldiers walked through the jungle all night, guided only by the moon and instinct. As they moved away from the coast, the sounds of battle became more distant, but something more disturbing replaced them, an absolute silence that seemed unnatural. "Did you notice?" whispered Minagawa around 3 a.m. "There are no insects, no birds. It's as if the jungle itself is afraid." Yokoi had noticed but didn't want to admit it. In all his experiences in nature in Japan, he had never encountered such complete silence. It was as if they were entering a dead zone. At dawn on July 22nd, the 3 soldiers found a small clearing near a stream. It was a perfect spot for a temporary camp. Fresh water, natural cover, good visibility of the surroundings. They decided to rest a few hours before continuing to search for other Japanese units. Yokoi was standing guard while Minagawa and Ito slept when he heard something that made his blood freeze. Voices speaking in Japanese, coming from the direction they had arrived. Initially, he was relieved. Maybe they were other Japanese soldiers seeking shelter. But as the voices approached, he realized something was wrong. The words were in Japanese, but the dialect was ancient, a form of the language he had heard only in traditional religious ceremonies. And there was something more disturbing. The voices seemed to be coming from underground. Yokoi woke his companions, and the three remained in absolute silence, listening. The voices continued for about 10 minutes, always whispering military commands in archaic Japanese. Hold position. The enemy approaches. Protect the sacred valley. Then, abruptly, silence returned. What the hell was that? Whispered Ito, his voice trembling. I don't know, replied Yokoi, but I think we're not alone in this jungle. They decided to move to a more distant location, but as they walked, Minagawa made a disturbing discovery. On the ground of the clearing where they had rested, there were fresh footprints of Japanese military boots, forming a perfect circle around the spot where they had slept. The footprints weren't there when they arrived, and none of them had gotten up during the night. Someone was watching us, murmured Minagawa. Someone or something. During the next 3 days, the three soldiers moved constantly through the jungle, always looking for a more permanent shelter. The battles on the coast had ceased, which meant the Americans had taken control of the island. They were officially behind enemy lines. It was Ito who found the cave. Located on the slope of a hill covered by dense vegetation, the entrance was almost invisible, just a narrow crack between two large rocks. But when Ito investigated more carefully, he discovered that the crack led to a much more extensive natural cave system. It's perfect, he said, emerging from the initial exploration. There are several chambers, an underground water source, and the entrance is completely hidden. We can stay here until the situation normalizes. Yokoi and Minagawa explored the cave and agreed. It was indeed an ideal hideout. The main chamber was about 4 meters wide by 6 meters long, with a ceiling high enough for them to stand. There were smaller tunnels extending in various directions, some leading to other chambers, others to emergency exits. But there was something strange about the cave that they only noticed after a few hours. The walls were covered with marks that seemed to have been made by tools, as if someone had artificially expanded the natural space. And these marks were old, much older than any military presence on the island. Who do you think made this? Asked Minagawa, running his hand over the marks on the wall. Maybe the natives of Guam long ago, suggested Yokoi. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't right. The marks were too precise, too systematic. They seemed to have been made by someone with engineering knowledge. That first night in the cave, the three soldiers established guard shifts and tried to sleep. But sleep was disturbed by something that would become a constant for the next years, whispers coming from the depths of the cave. The whispers were always in Japanese, always talking about duty, vigil, and protection, and they always seemed to be calling specifically for them. Yokoi, Minagawa, Ito, come deeper. There is work to be done. During the first 6 months in the cave, from July 1944 to January 1945, the three soldiers developed a survival routine that would be refined over the years. Yokoi, with his tailor skills, took responsibility for maintaining and repairing equipment. Minagawa, with his communications knowledge, tried to pick up radio signals that might indicate Japanese military activity. Ito, the marksman, became the group's hunter. The cave was systematically modified and expanded. Using improvised tools made from metal salvaged from abandoned military equipment, they created specific compartments for different functions: a sleeping area, a food storage, a rainwater collection and filtration system, and even a small workshop where Yokoi could work with plant fibers. Their diet consisted mainly of roots, wild fruits, crabs, snails, and occasionally small birds or rats that Ito managed to hunt with traps. Yokoi discovered that several native plants of Guam were edible and nutritious, knowledge that would become crucial for his long-term survival. But as months passed, it became clear that something was fundamentally wrong with their situation. In December 1944, the incidents began to intensify. What initially were just occasional whispers transformed into more direct and disturbing manifestations. The first visual manifestation happened during Minagawa's guard shift. It was about 2 a.m. when he saw a human figure standing at the cave entrance. The figure was wearing a Japanese military uniform, but there was something wrong with its appearance. It seemed translucent, as if made of mist. Minagawa woke Yokoi and Ito, but when the three looked at the entrance, the figure had disappeared. However, on the ground where it had stood, there were fresh footprints in the wet earth. "This isn't possible," murmured Ito. "I was awake just 5 minutes ago. I didn't see anyone approach, but the footprints were there, clear and undeniable. In the following days, the apparitions became more frequent. Always during the night, always Japanese soldiers in uniforms that seemed to be from different eras. Some wore World War II equipment, others wore uniforms that seemed to be from the Meiji period, decades earlier, and all of them seemed to be patrolling the area around the cave, as if they were protecting something. In March 1945, while expanding one of the smaller tunnels to create more storage space, Yokoi made a discovery that would completely change his understanding of the cave. His shovel hit something that wasn't stone. It was wood. Digging more carefully, he discovered an old wooden door, partially rotted, but still structurally sound. The door was locked, but the hinges were so corroded that he managed to force it. On the other side of the door was an artificial tunnel that extended much deeper into the mountain than anything they had explored before. The walls were lined with carefully fitted stones, and there was evidence that the tunnel had been used recently. Burned torches, footprints in the dust, even some abandoned Japanese military equipment. "This tunnel isn't natural," Yokoi told his companions. "Someone built this, and built it long ago." They decided to explore the tunnel as a group, carrying improvised torches and their weapons. The tunnel descended in a gentle spiral, always maintaining a consistent width of about 2 meters. As they descended, the temperature became colder, and they began to hear a strange sound like running water, but with a very regular rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. After about 200 meters of descent, the tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber, and what they found there left them speechless. The underground chamber was enormous, at least 50 meters in diameter, with a ceiling that was lost in the darkness above. But what was most impressive wasn't the size, but the content. The walls were covered with intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story. The carvings showed human figures in military uniforms from different eras, some clearly ancient samurai, others more modern soldiers. All were in guard or vigilance positions, and all seemed to be protecting something in the center of the chamber. In the center of the chamber was a circular structure made of black stone that none of them could identify. The structure was about 3 meters in diameter and was covered with symbols that didn't belong to any language they knew. And from the structure emanated a very faint bluish light, the same light that Yokoi had seen in the jungle the night before the invasion. But most disturbing were the skeletons. Around the central structure, arranged in concentric circles, there were dozens of human skeletons. All were in sentinel positions, kneeling or standing, with hands positioned as if they were holding weapons, and all wore fragments of Japanese military uniforms from different eras. "My God," whispered Minagawa. "How many soldiers died here?" But Yokoi was looking at something even more disturbing. Some of the skeletons weren't ancient. They still had flesh on their ribs, uniforms he recognized as being from the current World War II. "These soldiers died recently," he said, pointing to a skeleton that still wore a Japanese military helmet in perfect condition. "Very recently." That's when they heard the voice. It was a male voice, speaking in clear, modern Japanese, coming from somewhere in the darkness of the chamber. "Welcome, brothers. You've arrived at the right time. The vigil is about to begin." The 3 soldiers turned toward the voice, weapons drawn, but couldn't see anyone. The voice continued, always calm and controlled. "Don't be afraid. I am like you, a Japanese soldier fulfilling his duty. My name is Sergeant Kenji Nakamura of the 29th Infantry Division. I've been here since 1943. "Where are you?" shouted Ito, pointing his weapon in different directions. "Show yourself." "I am here," replied the voice. "I've always been here, just as you will be." Slowly, a figure began to materialize near the central structure. It was a Japanese soldier in full uniform, but there was something deeply wrong with his appearance. His skin was too pale, his eyes were completely black, and when he moved, he made no sound. "What are you?" asked Yokoi, trying to keep his voice steady. "I am a guardian," replied Nakamura, "just like all the others who came before me, and just as you will become." Nakamura began to explain the true nature of the cave and the central structure. According to him, that place was sacred long before the Japanese arrived in Guam. It was a convergence point of energies that the island's natives called the portal of ancestral spirits. When the Japanese occupied Guam, some high-ranking officers discovered the site and realized its potential. They initiated experiments to try to use these energies as a weapon, a way to create soldiers who would never need rest, food, or sleep. Eternal soldiers who could guard important positions indefinitely. The project was called Eternal Vigil, explained Nakamura. But the scientists didn't fully understand what they were messing with. The energy doesn't create eternal soldiers. It traps soldiers' souls, forcing them to guard this place forever. As Nakamura continued his explanation, the reality of the situation became increasingly clear and terrifying. The central structure was a kind of spiritual anchor that kept the souls of dead soldiers trapped in the physical plane. Any Japanese soldier who died on the island with a strong sense of duty and loyalty would automatically be recruited to become an eternal guardian. "But we're not dead," protested Minagawa. "We're alive. We're here by our own choice." "Though for now," replied Nakamura with a smile that didn't reach his black eyes. "But the energy is already working on you. You've felt the whispers, seen the apparitions, found this place. It wasn't coincidence. You were called here." Nakamura explained that the structure's energy fed on military discipline and soldiers' sense of duty. The longer they remained in the area, the stronger the connection would become. Eventually, they wouldn't be able to leave the island, even if they wanted to. "And if we try to leave?" asked Yokoi. "Try," replied Nakamura. "You'll discover that the jungle won't let you go. Time will bend, reality will distort. You'll always find a reason to return." The three soldiers left the underground chamber in shock. During the walk back to their cave, they frantically discussed what they had seen and heard. "This is madness," said Ito. "There has to be a rational explanation." "And if there isn't?" asked Minagawa. "And if we're really trapped here?" Yokoi said nothing, but in his heart he already knew that Nakamura was telling the truth. He could feel something changing inside him, a growing compulsion to protect the cave, to maintain vigil, to never abandon his post. In May 1945, the three soldiers decided to test Nakamura's words. They would make a coordinated attempt to leave the cave area and reach the coast, where they could try to surrender to American forces or find a way to leave the island. They prepared carefully, taking enough water and food for several days, improvised maps of the island and all their weapons. The plan was simple: walk in a straight line toward the south coast, avoiding American patrols, and find a way to signal passing ships. The attempt began at dawn. During the first hours, everything seemed normal. They made good progress through the jungle, following animal trails and natural landmarks they had memorized during their previous explorations. But as they approached the edge of the jungle, strange things began to happen. First, it was the sounds. They began to hear distant explosions, machine gun fire, screams in English and Japanese, as if the Battle of July 1944 was happening again. But when they looked toward the sounds, they saw nothing but silent jungle. Then it was disorientation. Despite following a compass and known landmarks, they seemed to be walking in circles. Trails that should lead to the coast led them back to the interior. The sun seemed to move wrong in the sky. Finally, it was fear, a primitive and irrational terror that grew with each step they took away from the cave. It was as if every cell in their bodies was screaming for them to return, that they were abandoning something crucial, that they were betraying a sacred duty. After 8 hours of walking, they found themselves back in the clearing, where they had camped the first night after the invasion, just 2 kilometers from the cave. "This is impossible," said Ito, checking the compass for the 10th time. "We walked in a straight line south for 8 hours. The jungle doesn't want us to leave," murmured Minagawa. Nakamura was right. Yokoi looked at the sky, where the sun was setting in exactly the same position where it had risen that morning. The laws of physics seemed not to apply in that part of Guam. They returned to the cave in silence, each lost in their own dark thoughts. That night, the whispers from the depths of the cave seemed louder, more insistent. "Welcome back. We knew you would return." Duty calls. The vigil continues. During the next 2 years, from 1945 to 1947, the three soldiers tried to maintain an appearance of normalcy. but the influence of the underground structure was clearly affecting all of them. Minagawa was the first to show signs of mental deterioration. He began spending hours alone in the deep tunnels, claiming he was receiving orders through his broken radio equipment. He talked about missions he needed to fulfill, patrols he needed to make, reports he needed to send to commanders who had died years before. Yokoi and Ito tried to help him, but Minagawa became increasingly aggressive when they questioned his orders. He began sleeping less and less, spending most nights standing at the cave entrance, standing guard against enemies only he could see. In December 1947, Minagawa contracted dysentery after drinking contaminated water from a nearby stream. Under normal conditions, the disease would be treatable, but the combination of malnutrition, mental stress, and the paranormal influence of the cave made his recovery impossible. During his last days, Minagawa was constantly delirious. He talked to people who weren't there, received orders from invisible officers, reported movements of enemy troops only he could see. "They're coming," he whispered repeatedly. "Thousands of them. We need to defend the position. We can't let them pass." Minagawa died on January 15, 1948, during a particularly cold night. His last words were, "Relieve me from duty. My vigil is over." Yokoi and Ito buried Minagawa in a small clearing near the cave, marking the grave with an improvised cross made of branches. They performed a simple Buddhist ceremony, praying that their companion's soul would find peace. But the night after the burial, something disturbing happened. Yokoi was standing guard when he heard a familiar voice coming from the cave entrance. "Yokoi-san, you need to hold the position. The enemy is approaching." It was Minagawa's voice. Yokoi looked at the entrance and saw a familiar figure standing there. Minagawa in full uniform, exactly as he had been in life, but with the same pallor and black eyes that Nakamura had. "Minagawa," whispered Yokoi. You died." "Death is just a change of post," replied Minagawa. "Now I'm a permanent guardian, and you'll join me too when the time comes." From that night on, Minagawa became a constant presence around the cave. He appeared during guard shifts, gave reports about imaginary enemy movements, and always insisted that Yokoi and Ito maintain their positions. Minagawa's death and his subsequent transformation into a spiritual guardian had a devastating effect on Ito's psyche. He became obsessed with the idea of escaping the island before the same fate reached him. During 1948 and 1949, Ito made several solitary attempts to leave the cave area. Each attempt ended the same way. He returned hours later, disoriented and terrified, talking about how the jungle folded around him, how time seemed to move backward, how he saw World War II battles happening as if they were contemporary. "It's not natural," he said repeatedly. "This island isn't natural. There's something here that shouldn't exist." Ito also began having vivid nightmares where he saw his own future, his death in the cave, his transformation into a spiritual guardian, decades of eternal vigil protecting the underground structure. These nightmares were so realistic that he often woke up screaming. In 1950, Ito developed a theory about how to escape the structure's influence. He believed that if he could destroy the spiritual anchor in the center of the underground chamber, it would free all the trapped souls and allow him and Yokoi to leave the island. "We have to destroy that thing," he told Yokoi. "It's the only way to break the curse." But when they went down to the underground chamber with improvised explosives made from abandoned military ammunition, they discovered they couldn't approach the central structure. An invisible force repelled them, and the more they tried to get closer, the stronger the resistance became. Worse still, Nakamura and now Minagawa appeared to defend the structure, physically blocking any attempt to damage it. "You don't understand," said Nakamura. "The structure isn't a prison, it's a purpose. You've been chosen to protect something much more important than your individual lives." It was during this confrontation in the underground chamber that Nakamura finally revealed the true nature of what they were protecting. The central structure wasn't just a spiritual anchor, it was a seal. Something had been imprisoned there long before humans arrived in Guam, something the island's natives called the World Devourer. The spiritual guardians weren't just fulfilling a military duty, they were preventing a cosmic entity from escaping and destroying reality as we know it. "The Japanese scientists thought they were creating a weapon," explained Nakamura. "But actually they were strengthening a prison that had existed for millennia. Each soldier's soul that joins the Guardians makes the seal stronger." "And if we stop guarding," shouted Ito, "and if all of us just leave, then the seal will weaken," replied Minagawa. "And when it breaks completely, there will be no more Guam, no more Pacific, no more Earth." The revelation was devastating for Ito. He realized there was no escape, not because they were trapped by supernatural forces, but because leaving would mean condemning all of humanity. The psychological pressure of knowing he was eternally trapped in Guam, combined with years of isolation and malnutrition, finally broke Ito's mind. In 1964, after 16 years in the cave, he developed a serious infection in a leg wound that had refused to heal properly. But unlike Minagawa, who had fought against death until the end, Ito seemed almost relieved when he realized his time was coming to an end. "At least now I'll know what my true purpose is," he told Yokoi during his last days. "No more doubts, no more fear, just duty." Ito died on September 3, 1964, during a tropical storm that lasted 3 days. His last words were, "Promise me you'll continue the vigil, Yokoi-san. Promise me you won't let the seal break." Yokoi buried Ito near Minagawa's grave, but this time he knew what to expect. The night after the burial, Ito appeared as a spiritual guardian, joining Minagawa and Nakamura in the eternal patrol around the cave. Now Yokoi was completely alone, the last living soldier in a garrison of the dead. From 1964 to 1972, Shoichi Yokoi lived in complete physical isolation, but was never really alone. The spirits of Minagawa and Ito were constant company, appearing every night for patrol reports and discussions about defensive strategy. During these years, Yokoi perfected his survival skills to an almost supernatural level. He could identify edible plants by smell, predict weather changes by wind direction, and move through the jungle in complete silence even in total darkness. His original clothes had long since disintegrated, so he learned to weave native plant fibers to create a functional wardrobe. He made needles from bird bones, thread from animal tendons, and even shoes from tree bark. But most impressive was his cave maintenance routine. He expanded the tunnel system, created sophisticated drainage systems, and even built elaborate traps to capture small animals. The cave became a masterpiece of survival engineering. However, as years passed, Yokoi began to notice changes in himself. His night vision had improved dramatically. He could hear sounds at impossible distances, and sometimes, when he looked at his reflection in water, his eyes seemed darker than they should be. He was slowly transforming into something more than human, something more suited for the eternal vigil he was destined to maintain. In January 1970, while expanding one of the storage tunnels, Yokoi made a discovery that would completely change his understanding of the situation. His improvised tool hit something metallic, buried deep in the earth. Digging carefully, he discovered a sealed Japanese military box, buried long before his arrival at the cave. Inside the box were documents that revealed the true extent of the Eternal Vigil project. It wasn't just a local experiment in Guam, it was part of a much larger military program that had been implemented at strategic locations throughout the Pacific. The documents included scientific reports detailing the discovery of temporal anomalies on various Pacific islands, maps showing the location of other containment structures similar to Guam's, personnel lists assigned to each location, including scientists, soldiers, and test subjects, military correspondence, discussing the ethical and practical aspects of using soldiers as permanent spiritual anchors. But the most disturbing document was a final report, dated July 1944, just days before the American invasion of Guam. The report indicated that the project had been a success beyond the scientists' most optimistic expectations. The entities contained at each site remain securely sealed, the report said. The spiritual guardians demonstrate absolute loyalty and indefinite surveillance capability. We recommend expansion of the program to all critical defensive positions in the Pacific. But there was a handwritten note in the margin of the document that made Yokoi's blood freeze. Personal note: the Guardians don't know that the entities they're protecting aren't prisoners, they're eggs. And when they hatch, there will be no force on Earth capable of stopping them. May God forgive us for what we've done. Dr. Hiroshi Yamada, Project Director. The revelation from the documents forced Yokoi to confront a truth even more terrifying than anything Nakamura had told him. They weren't protecting humanity from imprisoned entities. They were incubating something that would eventually destroy everything. The seals weren't prisons, but cocoons. And the spiritual guardians weren't heroes, but unwilling babysitters of cosmic nightmares. Yokoi realized the terrible truth. He wasn't hiding in the cave. He was being used as a living sentinel, kept conscious and vigilant by an entity that fed on his military discipline and sense of duty. And the ghosts of Minagawa and Ito, they had never really died. Their consciousnesses had been absorbed by the Force, transforming them into eternal guardians. That night, when Minagawa and Ito appeared for the nightly report, Yokoi confronted them with the documents. "Did you know?" he asked. "Did you know we're helping to create humanity's destruction?" Minagawa and Ito exchanged glances, the first time in years that Yokoi had seen them show any emotion beyond military discipline. "We suspected," Minagawa finally admitted. "But what does that change? Our orders were clear. Protect this site. Soldiers don't question orders." "But what if the orders are wrong?" insisted Yokoi. "What if we're on the wrong side of this war?" "Then we die fulfilling our duty," replied Ito, "as Japanese soldiers always have." But Yokoi could see doubt in their spectral eyes for the first time. For the first time in 26 years, Yokoi fundamentally questioned his purpose. If the documents were correct, then his vigil wasn't protecting humanity. It was ensuring its eventual destruction. During the following weeks, he obsessively studied the documents, looking for any information that might indicate a way to reverse the process. He discovered that Dr. Yamada had hidden several personal notes among the official reports, documenting his growing concerns about the project. June 15, 1944. Today's tests confirmed our worst suspicions. The entities aren't sleeping, they're growing. Each soldier's soul we add to the system accelerates the maturation process. July 3, 1944. I tried to convince High Command to cancel the project, but they refused to listen. They're obsessed with the idea of eternal soldiers. They don't understand we're creating something much worse than any human enemy. July 20th, 1944. This is probably my last entry. The Americans will attack tomorrow, and I'll destroy all official records. But I'll hide copies, hoping that someone someday might be able to undo what we've done. If you're reading this, know that there's a way to break the seals, but the cost will be the lives of all the Guardians. Yamada's last note included detailed instructions on how to deactivate the central structure. The process would require all spiritual guardians to voluntarily renounce their vigil at the same time, allowing their souls to finally find rest. Without the guardians' souls feeding the system, the structure would lose power, and the entities inside the cocoons would die before hatching. But there was a problem: convincing Minagawa, Ito, and all the other spiritual guardians to voluntarily abandon a duty that had become their very identity. In March 1972, Yokoi made the most difficult decision of his life. He went down to the underground chamber, carrying Yamada's documents and a determination that had taken months to build. The chamber was fuller than ever. Besides Nakamura, Minagawa, and Ito, there were dozens of other spiritual guardians, soldiers from different eras who had died in Guam over the centuries. All of them patrolled eternally around the central structure, which now pulsed with a much more intense bluish light than when Yokoi had first seen it. "Brothers," said Yokoi, his voice echoing through the chamber, "I need to speak with all of you." The guardians gathered around him, their translucent forms creating a ghostly circle. Yokoi explained what he had discovered in the documents, the true nature of the entities they were protecting, and the fate that awaited humanity if they continued their vigil. The reaction was immediate and violent. "Blasphemy!" shouted Nakamura. "You're trying to make us abandon our sacred duty." "The orders were clear," said Minagawa. "Protect this site. It doesn't matter what we discovered later." "A soldier doesn't question, only obeys," added Ito. But Yokoi had prepared for this resistance. He had spent months formulating arguments that would appeal to the true nature of Japanese soldiers, not just blind obedience, but protection of Japan and its people. "You're right," he said. "A soldier obeys orders. But what is the most fundamental order of any Japanese soldier? Protect the homeland, protect the people. And if our current actions are condemning Japan to destruction, then our true obedience requires us to change course." He showed them the documents, read Dr. Yamada's own words, explained how their vigil was inadvertently feeding the destruction they had sworn to prevent. "We are soldiers," continued Yokoi. "But before we are soldiers, we are Japanese. and a true Japanese sacrifices everything, even his honor, even his obedience, to save his people. The debate that followed lasted hours. Each spiritual guardian struggled with the terrible choice between absolute obedience to original orders and loyalty to the greater good of Japan and humanity. Some guardians, especially the older ones, completely refused to consider abandoning their posts. They had maintained vigil for so long that they couldn't conceive of an existence without this purpose. Others, particularly those who had died more recently, were gradually convinced by Yokoi's arguments. They still remembered their lives before death, families and friends they wanted to protect. Minagawa was the first of Yokoi's original companions to yield. "I remember my sister," he said, his spiritual form trembling with emotion. "She was only 16 when I died. If she's still alive, she would be over 40 now. She might have children, grandchildren. If our vigil is condemning them to destruction, then we're betraying everything we fought for." Ito was next. "Yokoi-san is right," he admitted. "We became so focused on obeying orders that we forgot why those orders were given. A soldier who wins a battle but loses the war isn't a hero. He's a fool." Gradually, more and more guardians were convinced, but not all. Nakamura and about a dozen other older guardians absolutely refused to abandon their posts. "If you do this," warned Nakamura, "you'll be committing the greatest betrayal in Japanese military history. I'd rather maintain vigil alone for all eternity than participate in this dishonor." Yokoi realized he would never convince all the guardians, but Yamada's documents indicated it wasn't necessary. Only the majority of guardians needed to voluntarily renounce their vigil to sufficiently weaken the seal. At dawn on January 24, 1972, Yokoi led the final ritual. More than 50 spiritual guardians gathered around the central structure. One by one, they formally renounced their vigil, declaring they chose eternal rest instead of eternal obedience. "I, Bunzo Minagawa, renounce my vigil. May my soul find peace, and may my choice protect those I love. I, Masashi Ito, renounce my vigil. May Japan live, even if I must truly die." As each guardian made their renunciation, their spiritual form dissolved into light, finally finding the rest that had been denied for decades. The central structure began to pulse irregularly, its bluish light growing weaker with each departing soul. Nakamura and the remaining guardians tried to interfere, but discovered they couldn't physically prevent the process. Each soul's choice was sovereign. Not even the structure's magic could force someone to maintain vigil against their true will. When the last voluntary guardian dissolved into light, the central structure emitted a sound like breaking glass. The lights went out, the symbols on the walls stopped glowing, and absolute silence descended over the chamber. "It's done," whispered Yokoi. "The entities are dead. The threat is over." Nakamura and the remaining guardians looked at the inert structure with a mixture of horror and relief. Their eternal vigil had finally ended, not because they abandoned their posts, but because there was nothing left to guard. "You saved the world," Nakamura finally admitted, "but you destroyed our honor in the process." "Sometimes," replied Yokoi, "true honor requires us to do things that seem dishonorable. A samurai who kills his lord to save his people is still a samurai, just one who understands there are things more important than blind obedience." With the structure deactivated, Yokoi discovered that the supernatural influence over the island had disappeared. For the first time in 28 years, he could feel he was free to leave the cave if he wanted. But something strange had happened during the ritual. As the spiritual guardians found rest, Yokoi felt part of his own humanity return. The supernatural changes he had noticed in himself, the enhanced night vision, superhuman hearing, darkened eyes, began to reverse. He was becoming human again. That morning, for the first time in decades, Yokoi left the immediate cave area without feeling compelled to return. He walked through the jungle, exploring parts of Guam he had avoided for years, simply because he could. It was during this walk that he encountered Jesus Duenas and Manuel de Gracia, checking shrimp traps near the Talofofo River. When Jesus Duenas and Manuel de Gracia saw Yokoi emerge from the jungle that morning of January 24, 1972, they initially thought they were seeing a ghost. The man before them wore clothes made of plant fibers, had long graying hair and beard, and moved with the caution of a wild animal. But when Yokoi spoke, in broken Japanese mixed with some English words he had learned from listening to radio transmissions over the years, They realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. A Japanese soldier from World War II, still alive after almost 3 decades in the jungle. "War over?" were Yokoi's first words to another human being in 8 years. "Yes," replied Duenas in simple English. "War over long time. Japan and America friends now." Yokoi nodded slowly. He had suspected this for years, but hearing confirmation from another human being brought a relief he hadn't expected to feel. The two hunters took Yokoi to American authorities in Guam, who immediately recognized the historical importance of the situation. Here was a Japanese soldier who had survived alone in the jungle for 28 years, a story that would capture the world's imagination. In the hours following Yokoi's discovery, American and Japanese military authorities worked quickly to establish an official narrative of events. The story that would emerge, of a loyal soldier who didn't know the war had ended, was much more palatable than the truth about supernatural experiments and cosmic entities. Yokoi, exhausted and still processing his own liberation, initially cooperated with this simplified version. When asked why he had remained in the jungle for so long, he simply said, "Orders were to never surrender. Japanese soldier obeys orders." But in private conversations with intelligence officers, Yokoi tried to explain the true nature of his experience. He spoke about the spiritual guardians, the underground structure, the Eternal Vigil Project, and his discovery of Dr. Yamada's documents. The reaction was predictable: total skepticism. "Mr. Yokoi Mucken," said an American officer, "you spent 28 years alone in the jungle. It's perfectly understandable that you developed elaborate fantasies to cope with isolation. What's important is that you survived, and now you can go home." When Yokoi insisted on the truthfulness of his story, offering to take authorities to the cave and show them the underground chamber, he was informed that the area had been declared a danger zone due to possible unexploded ordnance from the war. In fact, a secret military team had located and sealed the cave within 48 hours of Yokoi's rescue. All Eternal Vigil Project documents were confiscated and classified as ultra-secret. The inert central structure was briefly studied and then buried under tons of concrete. On February 7, 1972, Yokoi was transported back to Japan on a special military flight. His arrival at Haneda Airport was a massive media event. Hundreds of journalists, television cameras, and thousands of onlookers gathered to see the last soldier of World War II. Yokoi was visibly uncomfortable with all the attention. During his first press conference, he said the words that would become his most famous quote, "It is with great shame that I return alive." The statement was interpreted by the media as an expression of traditional Japanese military mentality, the idea that a soldier should prefer death to surrender. But those who knew Yokoi's true story understood that his shame had a very different origin. He felt guilty for having survived when Minagawa and Ito died. He felt responsible for having broken a system that, despite its terrible consequences, had been maintained by generations of dedicated soldiers. And he carried the weight of knowing there were secrets about the war he could never share with the world. Yokoi was initially treated as a national hero in Japan. He received a military pension, was decorated by the government, and became an instant celebrity. Books were written about his experience, documentaries were produced, and he was invited to numerous lectures and public appearances. But Yokoi struggled to adapt to modern life. Japan in 1972 was radically different from the country he had left in 1944. Technology had advanced decades, society had transformed, and even the language had evolved in ways he found difficult to follow. More disturbing for Yokoi was the constant feeling that he was being watched, not by government authorities, although he suspected his correspondence was monitored, but by something more subtle and persistent. Sometimes late at night, he heard familiar whispers in ancient Japanese, as if the spiritual guardians of Guam were still trying to communicate with him across great distances. In 1975, at age 60, Yokoi married Mihoko Hatashin, a 45-year-old woman who had been introduced to him by family friends. Ironically, it wasn't the same Mihoko he had courted before the war. That woman had married another man in 1946, presuming Yokoi had died. The marriage was Yokoi's attempt to create a normal life, but it was complicated by his inability to talk about his true experiences in Guam. Mihoko knew there were aspects of her husband's story he didn't share, but she respected his silence. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night, she said years later, speaking quietly to people who weren't there, When I asked about it, he would just say they were old friends visiting his dreams. Yokoi tried to keep a detailed diary of his real experiences in Guam, hoping that someday he could tell the true story. But he discovered that whenever he tried to write about the supernatural aspects of his experience, the words seemed to scramble on the page, or the ink would mysteriously disappear. It was as if something was still preventing the truth from being revealed. During the 1980s and 1990s, Yokoi gradually withdrew from public life. He stopped giving interviews, declined invitations to commemorative events, and spent most of his time tending a small garden at his home in Nagoya. But he never stopped monitoring news about Guam. He obsessively read reports about seismic activity on the island, unusual climate changes, and any event that might indicate something was wrong with the seal he had helped break. To his relief, Guam remained normal. The structure had been truly deactivated. The entities inside the cocoons had died, and the threat to humanity had been eliminated. But Yokoi also knew that Guam hadn't been the only site of the Eternal Vigil project. The documents he had found mentioned other islands, other seals, other groups of spiritual guardians maintaining eternal vigil over similar threats. "My work in Guam is finished," he wrote in one of his diary's last entries. But the greater war continues. Somewhere in the Pacific, other soldiers still maintain vigil, and someday they too will need to choose between obedience and salvation. Shoichi Yokoi died on September 22, 1997, at age 82, from age-related complications. His death was widely reported in Japan and internationally, marking the end of an era, the death of the last known World War II soldier who had remained in active service, even if unofficial, until the 1970s. But the true importance of Yokoi's death was only understood by a small circle of people who knew aspects of the true story. On the night of his death, observers in various parts of the Pacific reported strange lights in the sky, bluish lights that pulsed in regular patterns, as if transmitting a message. The phenomena lasted only a few hours and were officially explained as unusual meteor activity. But those who knew the truth understood it was something different. The remaining spiritual guardians at other Eternal Vigil project sites were paying their final respects to the man who had shown that it was possible to choose a different path. After Yokoi's death, his wife Mihoko found a collection of documents hidden in a safety deposit box he had kept secret for decades. The documents included copies of the Eternal Vigil project reports he had found in Guam, detailed maps showing the location of other project sites, secret correspondence with other survivors of supernatural military experiments, a spiritual testament explaining his actions in Guam and their consequences. Mihoko tried to turn the documents over to Japanese authorities, but was informed they were classified material related to national security and were immediately confiscated. However, Yokoi had been careful. He had made copies of the most important documents and hidden them in various locations around Japan, with instructions that they be revealed only after his death and only if certain conditions were met. One of these copies eventually reached the hands of an investigative journalist who spent years verifying the information and trying to corroborate Yokoi's story with other sources. Today, more than 25 years after Yokoi's death, the true story of his experience in Guam is finally beginning to emerge. Declassified documents, testimonies from other veterans, and physical evidence discovered at sites around the Pacific are gradually confirming aspects of his narrative that were initially dismissed as fantasies. In 2019, a team of marine archaeologists discovered the remains of a submerged Japanese military installation near Guam. The installation contained equipment and documents that corresponded exactly to Yokoi's descriptions of the Eternal Vigil project. In 2021, seismic sensors detected a network of artificial chambers beneath several Pacific islands, chambers that correspond to the maps found among Yokoi's documents. And in 2023, an international scientific expedition confirmed the existence of electromagnetic anomalies at locations Yokoi had identified as other project sites. But the most disturbing question remains unanswered. If Yokoi managed to deactivate the seal in Guam, what happened to the other Eternal Vigil project sites? Unconfirmed reports from various parts of the Pacific suggest that some of these sites may still be active. Fishermen report sightings of ghost soldiers patrolling remote islands. Commercial aviation pilots occasionally report strange lights emanating from islands that should be uninhabited. And on some of these islands, scientific expeditions have discovered evidence of recent human presence. footprints, campfires, improvised structures, but have never been able to find the inhabitants themselves. Is it possible that soldiers like Yokoi still exist, maintaining solitary vigil at remote locations, protecting secrets the world isn't ready to know? In the last documents Yokoi left behind, there's a warning that resonates with growing urgency as more evidence about the Eternal Vigil project comes to light. What we did in Guam was just the beginning. There are other sites, other guardians, other threats. Some of the seals may be naturally weakening over time. If the spiritual guardians at those sites don't make the same choice we made, if they continue their blind vigil without questioning the purpose, then humanity may face threats that will make any human war insignificant in comparison. Look for the signs: strange lights over the ocean, localized climate changes on specific islands, reports of ghost soldiers. These are indicators that seals are still active, and where there are active seals, there are guardians who need to be convinced to make the right choice. My vigil in Guam is over, but humanity's responsibility to protect itself from these ancient threats will never end. May those who come after me be wiser than we were, and may they have the courage to question orders when those orders lead to the destruction of those they swore to protect. Today, the cave where Shoichi Yokoi spent 28 years of his life is a popular tourist attraction in Guam. Thousands of visitors pass through there every year, admiring the ingenuity of a solitary soldier and reflecting on the human costs of war. Tour guides tell the official version of the story, a loyal soldier who didn't know the war had ended. They show the tools Yokoi made, explain how he survived, and talk about his eventual surrender in 1972. But they never mention the deeper tunnels, which were sealed with concrete decades ago. They never talk about the whispers that some visitors still report hearing from the depths of the cave, and they never explain why, even decades after Yokoi's death, fresh footprints still occasionally appear in the earth around the cave entrance. Footprints that are always in military formation, always vigilant, always on guard. Yokoi's story forces us to confront a fundamental question about duty, obedience, and moral responsibility. When is it right to disobey orders to serve a greater good? Yokoi spent 28 years of his life following orders he eventually discovered were fundamentally wrong. When confronted with this truth, he had the courage to choose humanity over obedience, wisdom over tradition, the future over the past. But how many of us would have the same courage? How many of us would question orders we've received for decades, especially when those orders have become our very identity? And perhaps more importantly, if guardians still exist at other Pacific sites, maintaining vigil over similar threats, how can we help them make the same choice Yokoi made? Because if Yokoi's story teaches us anything, it's that sometimes true loyalty requires betrayal, true honor requires dishonor, and true obedience requires rebellion. And somewhere in the vast Pacific, solitary soldiers may still be waiting for someone brave enough to show them there's a different choice. If this story left you thinking about the unsolved mysteries of World War II, leave a like and subscribe to Survivor Records. And tell me in the comments, do you believe there are still military secrets hidden on remote Pacific islands? What's your theory about what really happened during the war's most secret military experiments? And if you know someone who served in the Pacific during the war, or if your family has untold stories from that period, share this video, because sometimes the most important stories are those that were never officially told. Until the next disturbing story from Survivor Records, where we explore the darkest mysteries of human history. This story is based on the real life of Shoichi Yokoi, but includes fictional elements related to the Eternal Vigil project. Yokoi really did survive 28 years in the Guam jungle and was found in 1972, but there is no historical evidence of supernatural experiments or cosmic entities. Yokoi's true story is, by itself, an extraordinary testament to human endurance and the moral complexity of war.